Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
Tonight, the president's big, beautiful bill hits an even bigger roadblock.
If the bill doesn't pass, there'll be a 68% tax increase. Think of that, 68%, which would be the largest in history by about 40 points.
The procedural hurdle in the Senate today complicating efforts to pass Trump's massive tax and spending package as he pushes for its passage with a White House event. Why the Senate parliamentarian deemed parts of the bill ineligible to fast-track it for a vote, the delay it could cause, and the ask from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to remove the so-called revenge tax. We'll get into all of it when Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire join us up ahead.
Plus, Iran's supreme leader claims victory in the war with Israel, saying the administration's bombing achieved nothing. That declaration coming shortly before Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth held an event today calling the attack historically successful, despite one preliminary assessment that says otherwise. The shifting narratives around the attack when we speak with retired General Joseph Votel, former commander of U.S. Central Command.
And new reporting tonight on the timing of the White House's plan to nominate the next chair of the Federal Reserve as the S&P 500 nears a record.
We begin tonight, though, on Capitol Hill and President Trump's continued push for his one big beautiful bill after the Republican plan to cut $250 billion in Medicaid and other health care spending hit a procedural roadblock. The Senate's parliamentarian judging a series of key health care provisions today within this bill ineligible for the fast-track plan that would have bypassed the Senate's normal procedure, keeping Democrats out of the process.
At least two Republican senators reacting by calling for the parliamentarian's dismissal, while leadership is now working to refashion these provisions. But those rewrites risk pushing back an ultimate vote as that July 4th date inches closer and closer. It's contentious, it's in the weeds, and it's where we start with Bloomberg's Eric Wasson in the Senate for us. So, Eric, I guess a twofold question for you. A, can they rework this so that it passes muster with the parliamentarian? And on what timeline could they realistically do so?
You know, Senate leadership aides are confident they can rework this. This is basically the provision that preventing states from taxing Medicaid providers. It's a practice states have adopted that it effectively boosts their federal reimbursement rates as a backdoor way to really boost rural hospitals and other Medicaid providers. This has been very contentious among Senate Republicans. The Senate bill goes much further than the House in cutting this. Josh Hawley, Susan Collins of Maine, others have objected to that already. The parliamentarian does seem to give a reprieve to that, but Senate leaders say they're pushing forward to at least address the parliamentarians' concerns. Also ruled out was the ability to stop states from, giving Medicaid to perhaps undocumented immigrants. This comes on top of previous rulings that affected food stamps and other cuts. So far, it's about $600 billion in savings that's been ruled out, and that's raising the hackles of conservatives. They were already upset with the price tag of this bill. This is a $4.2 trillion tax cut, only partially paid for by spending cuts, and the pay-fors are going down.
All right. So, Eric, are we in for a rewrite here? And what's that going to mean for the bill getting to the House in time to meet this self-imposed deadline of July 4th?
It's going to be really close. I was just talking to Mark Wayne Mullen, one of the key negotiators here. They're talking about maybe voting Sunday night on this in the Senate after working all weekend and then getting into the House so the House can just vote on it on July 3rd and members can get back to celebrate the holiday with their loved ones. But that would be a very tough needle to thread. They've got the SALT issue. Nicola Loda of New York coming out condemning an offer from Secretary Bessent to basically make higher earners ineligible for the full SALT cap. They're at Treasury again today trying to hammer out a deal. We also have the issue of energy credits really impacting wind and solar stocks that are in flux as well.
Eric, I'd like to ask you as well about the news we got from the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent today as well, talking about a deal on the OECD global tax deal among G7 countries to defend America's interests. And he says because that has been reached, he has asked the Senate to remove Section 899, the so-called revenge tax. Is that a guarantee that will not end up in the final piece of legislation?
I think it's very highly unlikely to be in the final legislation. We have questions into the Senate Finance Committee and others just to put a finer point on that. But it does seem that this is satisfactory to some of the provisions. Sponsors Kevin Hern of Oklahoma coming out with a statement strongly, praising Bessent's move here. The revenge tax was never really designed to go into effect. It was meant as a cudgel to get an agreement on things like the digital services tax. These are efforts that really impact Meta, Google, Amazon, Uber, and others providing digital services. It would be a major win for those companies if there's agreement to get rid of those or to lessen them.
Eric, great to have you live from Capitol Hill as this continues to unfold. Bloomberg's Eric Wasson, thank you. As we turn now for more from Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, who's with us here in studio. Mike, what do you make of this? The President of the United States just about a moment ago wrapped up a big celebration. They called it one big beautiful event because we're staying on brand here, wrapping himself with stakeholders, calling out cabinet secretaries, almost as if the bill had passed today. Is he trying to push it over the finish line here or what?
It certainly is his version of the full court press here. And while it was celebratory in tone, there was no sign of any champagne flowing or corks popping or anything like that. And they sense the moment and they sense the urgency of having to get this over the line. And in making his pitch to the public and specifically to the public on Capitol Hill, and that includes some perhaps reluctant members of his own party in the House, which will have to vote on whatever the Senate has adjusted in this bill, he is sending a clear signal about what it brings. And these are key portions of his agenda. And when we heard him speaking about this, he talked about the end of taxes on overtime and on tips and on Social Security income. And he also talked about the bill as key to border enforcement. He talked about how it includes additional funding to hire more border agents. So when you hear it taken in total, it really sounded so much like his campaign message, Joe.
Well, and we heard plenty about something else in terms of his economic policy on the campaign, too, which is tariffs. He did talk about that and trade deals today, suggesting that yesterday the U.S. signed some kind of deal with China. Do we have any clarity, Mike, as to what exactly the president was talking about?
You know, we don't. And we even went to the White House after to find out, OK, what was he referring to? And they haven't given us a signal yet what that actually means. And it may simply be that the U.S. actually inked some formal understanding from the last round of talks in London. But stepping back from just the U.S.-China negotiations, which have really been intense and growing tense in the past several weeks, we also see talks unfolding with a number of other U.S. trading partners as this July 9 deadline nears. And we know that by that date, countries must achieve some progress in trade negotiations with the United States to avert a snapback of those reciprocal tariffs, which could be much higher than the current baseline of 10% that they're seeing. And yet we're seeing also that a number of these trading partners are unsure about what to expect because it's not just these reciprocal tariffs that they're awaiting. They also may get hit with sectoral tariffs. And those are the ones aimed at whole categories of goods like lumber, like copper, like semiconductors that may be coming in weeks or months. The U.S. opened this investigation through the Commerce Department of whether there is a national security risk and a justification to put tariffs of up to 25% on these categories of goods. So if you're a country like Japan that is a major exporter of a certain category of goods, say semiconductors, then you will have to think twice. Do I get a better deal under reciprocal tariffs, or what happens after with the sectoral tariffs on chips?
All right, Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, thank you so much. And a quick update on that Section 899 provision that we were just discussing with our Eric Wasson. Lawmakers now say in a statement they will be removing Section 899 from the tax bill. And we'll have more on that coming up when Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick joins us on this big, beautiful bill, but also the tariff deadlines that are still ahead. And we'll get reaction to the president's push on the tax bill with Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're having some great deals. We have one coming up, maybe with India, very big one, where we're going to open up India. In the China deal, we're starting to open up China, things that never really could have happened. And the relationship with every country has been very good.
President Trump just moments ago at the White House, holding an event to pressure Republican holdouts in the Senate as the mega tax bill works its way through the chamber. Of course, they want to see that done by July 4th, but the president there alluding to trade deals, which are supposed to be done by July 9th, at least in theory. And we want to get into more of this here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew in Washington, and Bloomberg's Michael Shepard is still with us. So, Mike, as we consider these kind of two deadlines, knowing that the president and the administration have always maintained these two pieces of policy really need to work together, that you can't view either one in a vacuum. How important will whatever trade deals are inked by July 9th be to the fiscal equation in the United States with a fiscal package that is supposed to be passing just days before?
It matters. The reconciliation package isn't counting necessarily the impact of tariffs, but they really are counting on the long-term impact of having some of that revenue or some of the economic benefit that they promise will be delivered by tariffs. They want to see the economy grow here, economic output grow here by a boost to manufacturing that President Donald Trump has said that tariffs will lead to. It will bring manufacturing back here, he has said, and he has pointed to a lot of investment promises made by industry, especially in the tech sector. And we even heard him today during his event talk about this. He talked about how coming back from his Mideast trip last month, where he stopped in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, and helped ink or at least unveil a series of investment promises here in the U.S. He said it exceeded $5 trillion. Our count is probably a little bit lower, but it gives you a sense of what they are betting on, hoping for in terms of what tariffs can do and the kind of international deals that they can get.
All right, Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, thank you so much. And we want to go live to the North Lawn of the White House now, where we're joined in an exclusive conversation by the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. You, of course, just left the East Room where President Trump held this one big, beautiful event, celebrating a bill that has yet to pass the Senate or repass the House. And obviously, the parliamentarian in the Senate has thrown up some hurdles today. Is the parliamentarian making this effort harder, making it harder to meet the president's deadline of July 4th?
I think reconciliation has a process, and we all respect the process. So I think they're just going through the way they do things in the Senate, and I think it's going to work out great for the president.
Secretary, it's good to see you. Welcome to Balance of Power once again. Your thoughts on some of the complications that we're hearing about beyond the parliamentarian. We've got the SALT caucus to satisfy. There are still questions about the level of cuts in the president's big, beautiful bill. Timeline is one thing. The final result is another here. When you consider what we just saw there in the East Room, what is there to celebrate today?
Well, I think today was motivational. You know, what we're doing is we're getting everybody together and saying, let's go past this bill, right? There's lots of people, as the president said, there's lots of people who are grandstanders, a few people, they want to make their point. They want to get their moment in the sun, their big moment of fame. But in the end of the day, the Republican Party is behind Donald Trump. They're going to pass this bill. It'll be the largest tax cut in the history of the United States of America. Or imagine if they didn't pass it, it would be the largest tax increase. So who isn't going to back the largest tax cut in the history of America? No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, really delivering on his promises. So I think we're all really excited about what's coming, and it's coming in the next week or two.
Well, when we consider who might not be super eager to vote on this package, Mr. Secretary, the aforementioned SALT caucus that Joe was just referring to is still threatening basically not to support this measure. They found the first offer from the Treasury Department on some kind of compromise unsatisfactory. We understand there will be more meetings happening today, but are you as a New Yorker going to have to get involved in this as well? You know how close to home this issue is for those members.
Sure, but, what's going to happen is these members and the senators, they're talking, they're pounding it out, they're working it out, and I am confident they're going to reach a consensus, and this bill is going to pass. Look, this is hard fought. It's one big beautiful bill, which means the key word is big. It covers all of the things that the president promised, and that's a huge amount of things to get accomplished. And I think we're feeling positive, and we're feeling optimistic. And sure, is it a lot of work? Oh my gosh, it's a lot of work. Speaker Johnson and Senator Thune are doing a great job, and I think you're going to see this pass. It's hard work, but it's coming our way.
Secretary, I'm really interested in exploring the relationship between the tax bill and tariffs. If you can maybe take us by the hand here. Does the tax bill only work when you have the revenue coming from tariffs? And we're, of course, having this conversation as we walk ever closer to July 9th, the deadline here for the reciprocals. If the bill alters anymore, does the tariff program need to change with it?
Not at all. The tariff program is in the power of the presidency. Right, Congress has given the president the power to work on these tariffs and to set these tariffs. So that's presidential power. So what's really interesting is this big, beautiful bill does not count the $88 billion of tariff revenue we've received, and now we're earning up to $30 billion a month in tariff revenue so far, and as you get to July 9th, that number is only going to go higher. We're going to announce a whole bunch of deals over the next week or so, and then we're just going to send letters out to everybody who's responded to us, put them in the right category, and off we'll go. So there's going to be tens of billions per month, and that's not included in the bill. So when they talk about the deficit, when they're talking about the bill, they're only talking about the things that bill touches. The extra $400 or $500 billion a year that the tariffs bring in, the new tariffs bring in, that just doesn't count for the bill. But of course, that cash counts for America.
Mr. Secretary, you just said that you're going to announce a whole bunch of deals over the course of the next week. With what countries? And does that include the China deal the president suggested was signed yesterday? What is that?
So the China deal, we inked the deal. You remember we had a trip to Geneva, and then that was being slow played. We got back together in London, and that deal was signed and sealed 2 days ago. President just said it just the other, I don't know, 15 minutes ago. And then he also suggested that we are, of course, at the very close finish line with India. Of course, the way these deals happen is their prime minister and their parliament have to approve it, and the president likes to close these deals himself. I mean, he's the deal maker. He loves to close it. I think we have deal after deal after deal. The president's going to make his calls. He's going to decide exactly the finishing touches on them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lay out a structure of all the different kinds of tariff arrangements with different countries, right? There are countries with huge deficits. There are countries that are balanced. We're going to set that all up and get that ready for July 9th.
So it sounds to me, Secretary, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I listen to you, that we either get 88 deals announced in the next 2 weeks, or there's going to be action one way or the other by this administration that July 9th will be conclusive. If there's no deal, here's the new reciprocal tariff. Is that right?
Of course. So what we're going to do is we'll announce some deals, but basically the deals we're going to announce are sort of the head of the class, the structural spot in the line, and then all the other countries will fit behind those categories, right? So we're going to do top 10 deals, put them in the right category, and then these other countries will fit behind. So you'll have South American deals and you'll have African deals. You'll have it all structured and set up, and that's the model how you do leadership, and we will put these people in their proper buckets on July 9th. So those who have deals will have deals, and everybody else who's been negotiating with us, they'll get a response from us, and then they'll go into that package, and July 9th will go forward. And as the president said, if people want to come back and negotiate further, they're entitled to, but that tariff rate will be set, and off we'll go.
Where does Europe fall in that sequence, Mr. Secretary? There was reporting from Politico today that the European Commission has received a latest offer from the U.S. Are you expecting that offer to potentially be accepted by next week?
I think that Europe has done an excellent job. They're working hard. Remember, it was a very, very slow process, if you remember, and the president put out a truth, kind of motivated him with that truth, as Donald Trump is capable of doing. They came to the table then. They started negotiating. They really put it on the table. And I've become optimistic. I think if you had asked me 3 weeks ago before that truth, I would have said no way. But since that truth by the president, I really feel I'm optimistic. I think we could get a deal done now. Europe will be right at the end, but you got to remember, they're our largest trading partner, so the fact that they come at the very end makes some sense. It's deep, it's complex, but I'm kind of optimistic now. I wasn't optimistic 3 weeks ago, but now, since the president got involved, I'm pretty optimistic, actually.
How about that? Fascinating. Secretary, before you leave us, I just went to trumpcard.gov. It says Trump card is coming. It's still on the way. When does this happen? How many will you sell when this is finally available? You've been saying that the phone's ringing off the hook here. Where are they coming from?
All right, our waiting list, right? And we've got a sort of a filtered waiting list where we go in and make sure the emails are correct, the people are correct. 75,000 people online at $5 million each, right? We're talking just under $400 billion worth of people online waiting for it to go live. So obviously our focus is the big, beautiful bill. And once the big, beautiful bill comes off, we're going to go with the Trump card. And I am really, really excited for our objectives. That has two things. Both, it'll bring in hundreds of billions of dollars to reduce the deficit of the United States of America, and it brings in great entrepreneurs into America, and they'll build our economy as well. So you get a double positive from the Trump card.
Howard Lutnick, U.S. Commerce Secretary, on the north lawn of the White House, where it's well in excess of 90 degrees today. We appreciate your insights, Secretary. Come back and see us again on Balance of Power. And joining us with another view of the tax bill process from the other side of the aisle, Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire is with us, ranking member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, it's good to see you. It's been some time, and welcome to Bloomberg TV and radio. I know you were listening along with us here at our conversation with Secretary Lutnick, and there was some big news today, the Senate parliamentarian saying that some provisions of the Medicaid component of the reconciliation bill are ineligible based on the rules of reconciliation. I know you've talked about the impact these changes would have on the state of New Hampshire. Did the parliamentarian improve the bill today, in your view?
Well, I think she did. We're still waiting to hear exactly what that means for what provisions, Medicaid provisions, will be out. But the reality is the original bill that we were looking at would have denied almost 16 million people access to health care. In New Hampshire, those people who benefit from Medicaid include children, they include the disabled, those people on long-term care. And so it would have been a significant cost to the state of New Hampshire. It would have meant so many people who would lose their health care. So we'll see exactly what the parliamentarians' decision means for the text that we get of that bill.
Well, Senator, as I'm sure you well know, some of your Republican colleagues today, like Senator Tommy Tuberville, have suggested the parliamentarian needs to be fired over this decision. What precedent would that set, even if she's not fired, if she were to be overruled, if leadership were to decide not to abide by her advice?
I think that sets a very bad precedent. The fact is, the parliamentarian serves not in a partisan capacity, but as an objective arbiter of what happens on the Senate floor. We have never seen the parliamentarian fired by either Democrats or Republicans. What we've heard from Leader Thune is that he doesn't agree with that. I hope that he is true to his word.
So, Senator, give us your sense on what's going to happen here. I know that you're not involved in this directly as a Democrat, but you've been through your own reconciliation processes before, and I'm sure you're hearing from your colleagues on both sides of the aisle. What happens when this goes back to the House, and how long is it going to take for them to pass this? Do you think this will be done by the 4th of July, as the president wants?
Well, that remains to be seen. It's my understanding that there's not agreement on the Republican side of the aisle about what should be in this bill. And I think that's for good reason, because what we see is that not only will we have millions of people who will lose access to health care, we will also see 20% of the people who are getting food assistance who will lose that food assistance. We're going to see the elimination of tax credits that have gone to help alternative energy sources and create good jobs in this country. And it's all to pay for tax cuts that the significant portion go to the wealthiest, not just 1% of Americans, but 0.1% of Americans. And that's going to be at the expense of the middle class and the people who can least afford to pay. So I don't think that's in the interest of the United States and what we need to do to invest in America.
Senator, we just had a headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal that the European Union has agreed to extend sanctions on Russia over the war in Ukraine. That, of course, as there is still a question as to whether or not a sanctions package is going to work its way through your chamber and through Congress as a whole. I know you were just on a congressional delegation to the NATO summit in the Netherlands. What is your expectation as to whether or not more sanctions are coming from the United States, whether that is something this administration is willing to pursue?
Well, I think that's very good news that the EU has passed that additional sanctions package on Russia. We need to put pressure on Russia to get them to the negotiating table. We need to end this unprovoked war in Ukraine that's killing too many people, that's costing too much of the economy. The Europeans want to see that happen. President Trump has said he wants to see negotiations, he wants to see a peace deal, but he's been reluctant to put pressure on Russia. What the Graham-Blumenthal sanctions bill would do in the Senate, and it has 82 co-sponsors, bipartisan, is to put in significant costs for those people who do business with Russia. So we know that countries like China and India and others are still buying oil from Russia. They're doing it under what's called the shadow fleet. We need to make sure they're paying for that in a way that puts pressure on the Russian economy so they can no longer conduct this war.
Senator, I'd like to ask you, as the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, what you thought of the news conference that we saw this morning at the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense is essentially blaming the media for not doing the job right in covering U.S. strikes against Iran. He and the president have suggested that it's an insult to the dignity of the pilots who carried out that mission to question whether, in fact, Iran's nuclear weapons program was obliterated, as the president calls it. You have access, of course, to sensitive information that I know you cannot share with us now. I wonder when you expect a real composite of all of the intelligence assessments from the various agencies so we can get a real answer on this. Or maybe we never will know. What do you think?
I think Secretary Hegseth was performing for an audience of one for the president, trying to make sure he keeps his job. I think the real substance in that press conference this morning came from General Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, where he talked about the history of putting together a plan to address Iran's nuclear program that started 15 years ago, as he pointed out. It started under President Obama. It's been the position of both Democratic and Republican administrations that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. I agree with that. We know that Iran has been a promoter of terrorism, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthis across the Middle East. They have promoted assassination attempts against American officials and others. We do not want a nuclear-armed Iran in the region that would not only be detrimental to the United States and our security, but it would set up an arms race across the Middle East that would not be good. So I think what we saw and what we've heard from General Kane this morning, from others who have looked at the information and preliminary assessments, is that it set back Iran's nuclear program in a significant way. We will have to wait for the long term for more information to assess just to what extent. But the important thing here is that they will still have nuclear scientists. They will still have the ability, should they choose to use it, to build back that nuclear program. And so in the long term, what we need to do is to get Iran to the negotiating table so we can come up with a peaceful solution to this issue.
Well, President Trump did suggest that there will be talks with Iran next week, though the White House press secretary told us today that no such talks have actually been firmly scheduled. But, Senator, do you believe Iran, having just been attacked by Israel for days and the United States, is going to be willing to pursue a diplomatic solution?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. What we saw was that Iran was ready to end the conflict. We know that they notified the United States before they attacked our air base. They gave us time to try and ensure that there would not be significant casualties from that attack. I think that's a good sign. We also know that Israel has taken out their air defenses in Iran. So again, that leaves them vulnerable. And hopefully that means that they're going to be willing to come to the table to negotiate.
All right, Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire joining us live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And earlier today on Bloomberg TV and radio, Mary Daly, the San Francisco Fed president, weighed in on, no surprise, Fed policy, specifically when she expects the Fed to cut rates. Take a listen.
Of course, if the tariffs are a one-off, you can look through them. And if they're just not going to materialize, then you have to watch both sides of the mandate. And I think that's really important. It's not one or the other. It's both sides of our mandate that have really come into frame since we brought inflation down from the really high levels to something that's closer to our target. Ultimately, we have to watch both sides, and that's what I'm doing. And then the fall looks promising for a rate cut.
This comes as President Trump says he already has a short list to replace the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, who at his event at the White House earlier this afternoon, he talked about having to fight over rates. That story, of course, one of the forces driving markets today is the S&P 500 briefly topped its all-time high. And joining us now for a recap is Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, live from World Headquarters in New York. Romaine.
Yeah, Kayleigh, it's funny you mentioned you play that Mary Daly tape, and then, of course, you hear the comments from President Trump. And the market's actually been doing a lot of work for him. In fact, you saw yields move down today precisely because of the continued drumbeat that we continue to hear from Fed members that, yeah, indeed, they are potentially ready to start cutting rates sometime this year. 2 rate cuts priced in for this year, and that could change in a big way based on the economic data that we get over the next couple of weeks. But they're pricing in 5 rate cuts through basically the middle of next year. And part of that, of course, had to do with some of the comments from President Trump yesterday about the idea of naming a replacement for Jay Powell much earlier than traditionally would be planned. Of course, you saw a big reaction in the Treasury market where you saw the Treasury curve effectively steepen. Basically, that means short-term rates are dropping much faster than long-term rates. And that is a direct signal from the market that they do expect the Fed to indeed start cutting rates sometime soon.
Romaine, the S&P 500 is a whisker away from a new closing high, a new all-time high. What will be the technical factors that come with that moment?
Well, you talk about a market, Joe, that was on the precipice of a bear market just a couple of months ago. We've had about a 23% rally off of those lows in April. And a lot of this has to do with at least the perception, Joe, that the removal of risk from Washington, or at least the lessening of that risk from Washington, is actually here to stay. There is a lot of optimism here. No, we don't have concrete trade deals, but we don't necessarily have the same saber rattling that we had before. You have a budget bill that a lot of folks do think will potentially get passed, and you're starting to see some of the provisions that this market was really on edge about, including that big revenge tax provision that would actually restrict foreign investment in the U.S. potentially being removed altogether. That's a net positive for this market, and it's a big reason why you have the NASDAQ 100 already at a record high, Joe, and, of course, an S&P 500 that at some point on the day did trade above its record high, and that really goes back to this idea, Joe, that, quite frankly, rates and, more importantly, financial conditions, the thing that the Fed controls, that's actually pretty easy right now for the market.
Fascinating, as always, to spend time with Romaine Bostick from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. Many thanks, Romaine. The White House is standing by its characterization of the damage caused by the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, as we were just discussing with the senator, while also now sharpening attacks on the press who reported otherwise. Here's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth during a fiery news conference this morning.
Still, this report acknowledges it's likely severe damage. Again, this is preliminary, but leaked because someone had an agenda to try to muddy the waters and make it look like this historic strike wasn't successful. Specifically you, the press. Specifically you, the press corps. Because you cheer against Trump so hard. It's like in your DNA and in your blood to cheer against Trump. And time again, classified information is leaked or peddled for political purposes to try to make the president look bad. I can assure you, the chairman and his staff, the intelligence community, our staff and others are doing all the assessments necessary to make sure that mission was indeed successful.
Joining us now with insights on this and some of the other information that we heard in that briefing today, retired Army General Joseph Votel, former commander of U.S. Central Command, distinguished military fellow at MEI. General, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. The good cop, bad cop thing that happened in the room there this morning, the blaming of the media. Let's put all of that aside for a moment. Did we learn anything new today?
I think we did. And first off, it's great to be with you. I think we did. I think General Kane, our chairman, I think did a really good job today of laying out more detail for the American public on exactly how this operation unfolded. I think he brought a lot of humanity to this. He talked about our analysts from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency and the work that they had done over really a decade and a half to understand this target and how that assisted in the development of the massive ordnance penetrator. He talked about our air defenders. He talked about our pilots. And then he added a lot more detail in terms of how these munitions were actually delivered to the site. And of course, he emphasized patience here has to be applied before we understand exactly what the final results are. But I think what he also did was build confidence in the American people, and that we actually did accomplish this mission, and this will ultimately be a successful strike here, that with the effects that we were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we consider how long it will take to know that definitively, what role will Central Command play with other intelligence agencies, with potential allies like Israel and their intelligence gathering apparatus? Just how many different players do we have to consider in this game, General?
Well, you know, there's 16 or 17 different intelligence agencies out there in the intelligence community, so each of them will play a little bit of a role in this. The Defense Intelligence Agency has a leading role because they do work for the Pentagon in this. But what's happening right now is we're in what we would think of as kind of phase 3 of the battle damage assessment. And what's occurring right now is we're trying to get kind of a total system assessment here. We're not only trying to understand what happened at Holdouts, but we're also trying to understand what happened at the other sites and what's the cumulative effect of all the strikes that Israel did as well. So, for example, they had a number of sites around the country. They took out a number of nuclear scientists, a number of academic and research locations. So what we're trying to do now is really get a much more fulsome look at what the impact has been on the total nuclear program, not just what happened at Holdouts, but the whole program, so we can actually make an informed assessment about how long Iran has been set back in this in their endeavors.
What's your thought of the highly enriched uranium that some say is missing and the president and Secretary of Defense say was destroyed as part of the complex at Fordo? There have been questions about whether the Iranians moved this material. Wouldn't we know that with the number of eyes we have on that piece of land?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, yes, we should be concerned about highly enriched uranium, and I think we all can hope that a lot of it was destroyed at the site. But there is the likelihood that perhaps some of it got away. I think that the key, and we'll have to learn this with our intelligence assessment over the coming days and weeks. But I think what's important to appreciate is that highly enriched uranium, you just don't take it and stuff it into the top of a missile and launch it. It actually has to go through a weaponization process of its own. And a lot of those conversion locations, those conversion facilities were on the target list for the Israelis. So that's why I'm saying we have to look at the whole system that is involved in the development of this nuclear weapons program for Iran. But we certainly need to be concerned about the highly enriched uranium and where that goes and where it ultimately might end up. It certainly could be a problem for us down the line if it's not under control.
Well, I take your point, General, about looking at things holistically, and I also wonder how we should be considering not just Iran going forward, the Islamic Republic itself, but also its proxies, especially as we consider our forces that are still in theater in the region and whether or not they are still potentially in imminent danger, even if the U.S. and Iran and Israel have suggested cessation of hostilities for now.
Yeah, I think we have to remain vigilant against the proxies. I mean, the proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Iranian militia groups that are located in Iraq and Syria. These are all vital parts of the Iranian threat network. Now, a number of them have been severely degraded. For example, Hezbollah and Hamas have really been degraded. Of course, our operations this spring against the Houthis have reduced some of their capabilities, but they are still out there. There's still remnants, and we have to be concerned about these organizations, and we have to be vigilant with our men and women across the region as we pursue our interests in our various missions. So, yeah, this could certainly be something we see right now. I do take a little bit of stock in the fact that a lot of the command and control that Iran uses to direct these proxies has largely been disrupted. The Quds Force leadership has been pretty much decimated. And of course, they were the ones who provided a lot of the guidance for these types of organizations. So they're out there a little bit on their own right now, which could make them a little bit dangerous, could make them rogue actors. So we have to remain vigilant and see how this part of the threat develops.
All right, General, we appreciate you joining us. Retired General Joseph Votel, former commander of U.S. Central Command. Thank you so much. Coming up, we'll turn back to the conversation on what's next for Republicans' tax bill and the roadblocks thrown up by the Senate parliamentarian today when we assemble our political panel. But first, the House Judiciary Committee has subpoenaed Harvard over the cost of tuition. We'll bring you those details next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. Now to a roundup of stories that we're following here at Bloomberg. What began as a battle between elite universities and the administration now involves the legislative branch after House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan subpoenaed Harvard for communications pertaining to tuition prices. Jordan says he is concerned that Ivy League institutions are, quote, engaging in perfect price discrimination by offering selective financial aid packages to maximize profits. The Judiciary Committee initially reached out to Harvard on April 8th and called its response to the request for information inadequate. Though the initial letter was sent out to all 8 Ivy League universities, only Harvard has been publicly issued a subpoena. The school has until July 17th to turn over the documents.
And next, a day after Zoran Mamdani declared victory in his New York City primary race, embattled Mayor Eric Adams says he is still in the fight.
I'm so proud to be here to say to the people of the city of New York, I am seeking re-election to be your mayor of the city of New York. So you can call me all the names you want, but I'm going to answer to only one, Mayor Adams.
The incumbent mayor launching his re-election campaign today, this time as an independent. After several corruption investigations and charges saw Democrats back away from his candidacy, Adams has also sought to curry favor with President Trump since the Department of Justice dropped the charges against him, raising questions about Adams' indebtedness to this White House.
And former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has until tomorrow to officially exit the New York City mayoral race if he wants to keep his name off the ballot. Cuomo precautionarily filed paperwork to run as an independent if he lost the Democratic primary, a race he conceded Tuesday. According to the city's official election calendar, if Cuomo does not step aside before tomorrow's deadline, he will appear on the November ballot as an independent, even if he later decides to drop out. We should note Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, endorsed Cuomo in the Democratic primary. Now, we want to return to some news we made earlier this hour when we had an interview with the White House Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who had this to say about the U.S. finalizing a trade deal with China.
So the China deal, we inked the deal. You remember we had a trip to Geneva, and then that was being slow played. We got back together in London, and that deal was signed and sealed 2 days ago.
And that's not all we discussed with the Commerce Secretary. He also, of course, was pitching President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill after what was described as a one big beautiful event at the White House today, pushing for the legislation's passage. And joining us now with more is this evening's political panel, Meghan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Annalyse Keller, partner at 7 Letter. Welcome to you both as we consider the rush to get this package done by July 4th, which is where the deadline they say they want to abide by still. The parliamentarian seems to be making things more difficult. Annalyse, having ruled that some measures, or suggested some measures in the healthcare space specifically, don't pass muster for budget reconciliation. How do senators work their way out of this one?
So a few things are important to remember. Just because the Senate parliamentarian said that these are not going to work does not mean that they are entirely out. They're going to redraft a lot of these provisions. There's been a lot of talk from some senators about maybe firing or, overruling the parliamentarian. And I can say that is not going to happen. They're going to work together, and it's just going to take time. It's a process that's going to work out, which, as you mentioned, the time is of the essence, and that is going to become the challenge. Are they going to be able to work with the parliamentarian, work through the weekend as they're planning, and get this thing done?
Is that your expectation?
It is.
Yeah.
That's my expectation.
We had a hard wonk out earlier today with Bill Hoagland from the Bipartisan Policy Center about the actual process here. And he's really good at walking us through this. Listen to what he said about the role of the Senate parliamentarian.
She tells the chair, this particular provision violates the Byrd Rule. A point of order is well taken. At that particular point, the chair, who's sitting in the chair, that could be the vice president of the United States, could say, no, I don't think so. And I'm not going to rule that it violates it. Now, at that point, we're wonky. At that point, somebody can stand up. I question the ruling of the chair. And at that point, it would require 60 votes to overturn the ruling of the chair.
So we need a sequel to Schoolhouse Rock at some point here, Meghan. Bill seemed offended by calls for the parliamentarian to be fired. Senator Tommy Tuberville referred to her as a woke parliamentarian and should be removed ASAP. It's actually not really the way it works. I guess you'd have to call for the chair to be fired if you wanted to make a difference here. But what's your thought on where this goes? Will Republicans write around it, get this back into the bill, or do we have to start from scratch here?
I think they'll write around it and get it back in the bill, just like she was saying. I don't think that the Trump way of doing things where you just insult the person because you don't like their ruling is going to work in the Senate. That's not what the Senate is about. We all know there's many, procedures and policies and sort of the nature of the way the Senate works and the way Congress works.
And John Thune says he'll follow them, right?
Exactly. And I think you will get so much more blowback from your colleagues if you sort of go around some of these things. So they'll rewrite and they'll work through the weekend. I think it really does put the timeline in question for July 4th, getting it to the president. But I do think that they will figure out a way to get what they want in there and to do it legally.
Well, as we consider if they're trying to figure out a way to make sure this stays in the package, doesn't that mean then that they still have a whip count problem, Annalyse? Because Tom Tillis or Josh Hawley, they didn't really want this in here to begin with. Right. They were very worried about the impact on rural hospitals.
There is something in this bill for everyone to dislike. Conservative fiscal hawks feel like it doesn't do enough, it doesn't cut enough, it's not fiscally responsible enough, they want more. Then you have the moderates in the Republican conference in the Senate and in the House who feel that they're concerned, like Susan Collins with some of the Medicaid provisions that we're talking about now. They want actually more of what the House did. So those are the two dynamics that played out at the House. They're playing out at the Senate as well. And then it's going to have to go back to the House and all play out there again early next week.
To Kayleigh's point, though, they didn't have the votes yesterday to do this. What makes us think that John Thune will have them by the end of the weekend?
So imagine the picture of the Senate. You're going to have the Vice President there, J.D. Vance. He's going to be in the well. He's going to be strong-arming.
So this is about knocking heads together.
He's going to strong-arm them. And then they're going to have Donald Trump on the phone, on speakerphone, off to the side, getting people in line. I think they're going to work through some of these major challenges now, but that's going to be the dynamic when it moves to the Senate floor.
Who do you see as most resistant to strong-arming here, Meghan? Is it the fiscal hawks that Annalyse was just referring to? Is it the SALT caucus? Is it the moderates who have real concerns over Medicaid?
I think it's all of them at different points. And I think if they can rewrite some legislation to get at least one of those coalitions to a place where they're happy. But I don't think that J.D. Vance has the strong arm that Donald Trump has. And I don't think that they are up against a clock here, a self-imposed clock, of course. But they are up against a timeline here. And then they are also up against people in the House had made it clear that they wouldn't have voted for the bill if they read the entire thing. So they're now going to have to go back and see what the things that they didn't read, and they're going to be called to the carpet on those things by their own constituents. So I think there is an uphill battle here, and it's not just right now. And even if this does pass, they have an uphill battle for the 26th election cycle. And I think that the Republicans now are trying to figure out how to hold on to the House if these people have to take a vote on cutting Medicaid.
So is there blood in the water for Democrats to take advantage of? What can you do in a vote-a-rama to change this or slow it down?
I don't think you can do anything to slow it down. I think that they have been really coalesced together across the same messaging. Democrats, for once, have it together, and they have been winning the messaging battle on this. Most of Americans, two out of three Americans, do not like this bill, do not like what's in this bill. And so I think that this will all come to roost for the midterm elections when they are reminded of how many people are cut off of Medicaid and how many people are losing their SNAP benefits and other food assistance programs in their districts. There is a significant amount of people that are on Medicaid that are going to lose Medicaid. 16 million people, I think, was the last number we saw from the CBO. So I think that's a significant number of people in all these districts that are going to have to vote for their members.
Well, Meghan makes an excellent point on polling. We have seen that pretty consistently. This bill isn't popular with the American electorate. How do Republicans course correct on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're already seeing it. Donald Trump and others are coming out and they're doing a little bit more. They're talking about how if they don't pass this bill, it's going to be a massive tax hike. But the reality is all of those tax revisions, people are already feeling them. So next year, there's not going to be like a huge adjustment in their pocketbooks from a new tax provision. I mean, this is just an extension of making permanent of tax cuts that were passed in 2017. The other thing when it comes to health care, some of those provisions are phased in over the course of many years and years out. So, we will see how how immediately people will be feeling some of the things like work requirements and other Medicaid provisions. And I think Republicans are going to try to sort of say, Mandami, for example, is sort of the new face of the Democratic Party, and they're going to try to contrast defunding the police and doing, safe injection sites. I mean, that's where Republicans are going to try to find their message of contrasting that face of the Democratic Party with their vision of, a safe America with low taxes.
All right. We're out of time. Quick yes or no. Does he sign the bill a week from today?
Yes.
President, you think that happens?
No.
All right. There we go. How about that? Meghan Hayes and Annalyse Keller. Great conversation. Thank you both for a great panel. And we invite you to check out the Washington Edition newsletter to follow up on all the stories, including those we broke during the program tonight on the terminal and online.
And of course, we'll continue to do so tomorrow. So we'll see you then here on Balanced Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.